As we just heard in addressing the Springfield College graduating class more than 50 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, "We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools." More than 50 years later, Americans still sometimes struggle to coexist. I spoke with Bishop Talbert Swan II, president of the NAACP and pastor of Spring of Hope Church of God in Christ in Springfield, about what Dr. King would say about the state of race relations today.
Well, I think Dr. King would be pleased in terms of progress that has been made in the 50 years since he was assassinated. He certainly would have been elated with the election of the first African-American president and seeing Barack Obama serve 2 terms. But I think he would be sadly disturbed at the racial polarization in the nation that we see today. It's reminiscent of the times during his lifetime and even before he became active in the civil rights movement, how divided the United States are, or as Maya Angelou would call it, these yet to be United States of America. So I think he would have a great level of concern with what's going on in the nation today.
You mentioned President Obama, and we talked on this show after he was elected about the concept of a post-racial society. Looking at that now, was that just a political talking point, or do you think that people were really hopeful that that was something on the horizon?
I think that people were genuinely hopeful that that his election was the harbinger of a post-racial America. I think what they were shocked to find out was that his election actually woke up the racist underbelly that still existed in America. It started out first stirring up the Tea Party activists, and then it culminated in the election of Donald Trump, I believe, and what we see today, the kind of open, in-your-face racism that was more covert in the past is now definitely more overt, and it's really running rampant across the United States.
When we look at the nature of the civil rights movement under Dr. King, nonviolent protest was a tremendous part of that movement. And when you look at Colin Kaepernick and the NFL making their nonviolent protest, do you think that is a continuation of that movement? And then the second part of the question, was nonviolent protest discussed as something controversial then?
Yes, so one, yes, I think it is a continuation of the nonviolent protests of Dr. King's era, which was really inspired by Mahatma Gandhi of India. But what I do think is very similar is the same level of scrutiny and disdain that Colin Kaepernick has been looked upon because of sparking this nonviolent protest was how Dr. King was looked upon during his time. It's easy posthumously to look at Dr. King as an icon and a hero. But many of the people today that have a problem with Colin Kaepernick would have been those who had a problem with Dr. King back in the 60s. His famous letter from a Birmingham jail was a letter to 8 white clergymen who felt like he was an outside agitator coming into Birmingham and that he just needed to wait, and in time things would get better. They saw his nonviolent protest as agitation, much in the same way that Donald Trump and those of his ilk saw those NFL players who took a knee during the national anthem.
When you look at media coverage, we know that we have access to more media, whether that is through the internet, 24-hour news cycles, things of this nature. Do you think about whether or not we're actually seeing a rise in instances of racially motivated violence and racially charged instances, or do we just have more access?
I think that what we're seeing has always existed in America. We're just seeing it a lot more today than we did in the past. Gil Scott-Heron used to have a song back in the 60s that said the revolution will not be televised. He certainly didn't see this day and age where access to what was going on in America was only a nanosecond away from the time it happened, and we actually see the revolution being televised right before our eyes.
The Black Lives Matter movement certainly has been televised and also tweeted. The social media presence is very strong among that movement. Recently, one of the members of the movement was killed, and I wanted to read something that he told the New Yorker after the fatal shooting of the 9 people at the Emmanuel AME Church in South Carolina. And his name is Muhyiddin Moy, and what he said is that no leadership arose demanding to have this pain recognized. Again, it's let me accommodate you so you're not scared. We'll just get on the bridge and hold hands. Jesus is good, we're over it. We endure, we don't ask for more.
Poignant words, and I agree with what he said. I've visited that church. I've spoke from its pulpit. I've prayed there. I was there in the basement where those 9 individuals were killed at Mother Emanuel Church. And often what you see in the wake of tragedies like that is this expectation for African American people who have been victimized to express a level of contrition and forgiveness toward their aggressors, and to then accept the status quo and keep moving. That has been frustrating for many of the activists in the Black Lives Matter movement. It has been frustrating for many of us. I don't ever think violence is the answer, but one thing Dr. King did say, he said that the riot is the language of the unheard. And so, though he didn't believe in violent protest, he understood the impetus behind it and the catalyst that would cause people to turn to violence.
But how do we, as a society, insist on more around civil rights and race relations?
We've got to be more deliberate about sustained action as opposed to moving from news cycle to news cycle, from incident to incident. And so what we've seen happen is we've seen a number of people become hashtag Trayvon Martin, hashtag Tamir Rice, hashtag John Crawford, hashtag Eric Garner. And we go from hashtag to hashtag without sustained effort to demand that laws be changed, to demand that police officers be held accountable, to demand that prosecutors don't use the grand jury as a way to get rogue police officers out of indictments and out of being prosecuted. And so we've got to be consistent, and we've got to have people to join that struggle and that fight. We've got to have a movement that is more strong on action and less proactive in terms of the rhetoric.